Hello, everyone. It's Congressman Jamie Raskin from Maryland's 8th District. Today is Friday, March 26th, and we are marking a National Day of Action and Healing to oppose the terrible wave of violence against Asian Americans that we've experienced in the country, and to stand with our brothers and sisters in the AAPI community. I am delighted to welcome Governor Larry Hogan and First Lady Yumi Hogan, along with my colleague, District 20 Delegate David Moon, who I got to work with for so long in Annapolis, for a discussion about the alarming increase in anti-Asian American prejudice and bigotry and violence that we've seen over the course of the COVID-19 pandemic. I want to welcome all of you and thank you for joining me for this conversation. First, I'd like to go to the governor and to First Lady Hogan, and I want to thank you both for being so outspoken about what's happening here. I think this has been really important for our state and for our country. And I have to tell you, frankly, it was very important in Congress to be able to invoke both of you, because there's been some effort to make this a partisan issue, and it shouldn't be a partisan problem. It should be something that unifies us across the board. But let me start by asking the Hogans, why did you guys decide to speak out, and how has this new wave of bigotry and stereotyping and violence affected your family and your friends?
Well, Congressman, thank you very, very much. It's really great to be here with you on this National Day of Action and Healing to discuss a crisis that hits, very close to home for me and my family. As a husband and a father, I'm sickened by the racism that my wife and daughters and their friends have had to contend with throughout their lives. But especially during this pandemic. A few weeks ago, our youngest daughter told us that she was afraid to drive to visit us with our granddaughter because her friend's mom had recently been attacked at a gas station. And then last week, the First Lady told me that her assistant was afraid to keep jogging in Howard County after a car had approached her and the occupants pulled over and screamed racial slurs at her.
Yeah, thank you so much, Congressman. Opportunity is today. You're, helping our community. Today, so many Asian Americans living in fear. Why do we need to be afraid? As a proud citizen of this country, we shouldn't be afraid of anything. We must stop the hate. Hate has no home here. Thank you, Congressman, for bringing attention to this issue.
Well, Yumi, thank you for being so outspoken about it and standing tough. I wonder if I could ask you guys, has there been a change? In other words, the kinds of incidents that you've described to me about people being harassed at a gas station or in a supermarket, is this something that has gone on for a long time, or is this a real change that you've seen over the last year or several months?
So I think things have been happening for a long time, and I can tell you, I hear stories from my wife and my daughters about things they've experienced their whole lives, but there's no question that the hatred, the vitriol, the violent attacks have escalated dramatically over the past year. As we're all dealing with COVID-19, this is an added burden for the Asian community because they're being blamed for this, and people are taking it out their frustrations on them. And it's while hate crimes were down in our major cities by 7% over the past year, for Asians it went up nearly 150%. So there's no question it's gotten worse.
Well, David, let me come to you. You grew up in Montgomery County. You've made your career here, your life here. And you, I should say, are somebody that I'm very close to. You ran my first campaign, and you know Montgomery County very well. How are we doing in Montgomery County, and what is it that you've seen and experienced and your family and friends have experienced during this period?
Well, number one, Jamie, thanks for putting this together. This sort of dialogue is important. I hate to tell you the honest truth. When I was thinking about what I wanted to say today, vague memories of an incident from my childhood were coming back to me, where an Asian family in the cul-de-sac I grew up in Bethesda had their home spray painted with slurs. And so this would have been Montgomery County a few decades ago in a low crime neighborhood. And this incident stands out now as something that happened. I don't recall that me and my family even had a conversation about it, which is just an interesting detail here. And so when you look at the mass shootings of Asian women in Georgia, it was certainly a wake-up call to me. Sadly, not because of the disgusting and depraved violence. I was sitting there floored, watching the commentary, listening to it from my colleagues, from people I went to school with on Facebook, where their first and only take on the situation was to immediately dismiss there being anything to do with the race, ethnicity, or national origin of the victims. And believe me, I understand the complexities of that conversation, but I had always thought the sort of dehumanization, the otherization, the fetishization of Asians was sort of an obvious and known thing. And it wasn't until really this last month that I was like, oh my God, are people just unaware of, what's been going on? And so after a year capped by the president calling this Kung flu and a China virus, we had on the House floor this past week elected members trying to link immigrants to COVID-19 and 9/11 terrorism. And so it's believe me, it's been there since my childhood, and it's on the House floor, this month. So thank you for putting together this dialogue.
Last month in Howard County, which I think the governor mentioned, there were 4 Asian American owned restaurants that were burglarized on the Lunar New Year, and lots of people who were patrons in Chinese restaurants were verbally assaulted and attacked. In MoCo, in our area, in Silver Spring and Tacoma Park, David, 2 Asian restaurant owners were followed home and robbed of money last month. Both victims were women. And in fact, the vast majority of anti-Asian hate incidents have targeted AAPI women. And of course, we saw the nightmare of what took place in Atlanta this last week. At the University of Maryland, there was one other incident I wanted to mention. A young female student said an older white man spat at her while she was in the grocery store. Another student got a text from her father, or from his father, urging him not to travel alone because of all of the incidents that were taking place. And a lot of people have been confronted with this phrase, China virus, just, and I mean, there's no ends to the unreason and the irrationality of it. I mean, so there are people, it's sick enough to blame Chinese Americans for what is falsely attributed to the Chinese people, which was falsely attributed to the Chinese government, which is a virus, which obviously has no national citizenship. But then to just randomly start attacking Japanese Americans and Thai Americans, Vietnamese Americans, I mean, it's just racism. There's no other way of describing it. And there's so many reports of that going on. The governor, you recently announced enhanced visibility patrols across Maryland to protect our AAPI communities and business owners and workers. Can you and the First Lady tell us a little bit more about these visibility patrols and any other resources that Marylanders should be aware of? Like there's a hotline too, right? Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, well, earlier this week, First Lady and I, we toured a number of Asian-owned businesses in Howard County, which were recently vandalized, as you mentioned, on Lunar New Year. And in response, as we were walking around, we went to, by the way, Korean, Chinese, Vietnamese, and Thai businesses. And while we were walking around the parking lot, we had a woman come out and tell us that she had been attacked. She was the owner of the restaurant. She had been attacked out in front of her store, and that now they were all afraid to leave unless they were going in groups, and they couldn't go out the back door because of the danger that they felt. But this is happening in a lot of places. And so in response to this uptick in violence and harassment, I directed the Maryland State Police and all of our state and law enforcement agencies and to immediately enhanced visibility patrols and to try to provide increased protection for members of our Asian community. We also put out bulletins, awareness bulletins to all the Asian-owned businesses to ensure their safety against further attacks. And we are coordinating with all of the local police and sheriff's departments. And the First Lady and I are encouraging anyone who is a victim or who is a witness to a hate crime to please come forward and contact the state police or their local police and report these incidents. A lot of times people are afraid to report the incident or they don't think that it's going to make a difference. And I just want to encourage everybody to make sure that we are going to take it seriously and it will make a difference.
Well, I so appreciate your energizing and focusing law enforcement resources on the problem, Governor. I wonder, as I listen to you speak, I wonder to what extent we have a problem of organized, racist groups actually attacking our Asian American citizens. I'm still recovering, I suppose, from the trauma of January 6th, where we had Proud Boys and 3% and Oath Keepers and all these groups come in. I mean, to what extent are we dealing with our own organized hate crime here, or do we think it's just random? I mean, obviously, I prefer not to think of our people in Maryland being capable of this. I consider us a diverse, tolerant, loving state. And so that's why it's so shocking to hear these things. So do you know where it's coming from?
Yeah, well, in talking to our law enforcement leaders on that topic, it seems as if at this point, and we don't know until all of these hate crimes are investigated and potentially prosecuted. And by the way, we've asked all of our law enforcement and our prosecutors at the federal and state level to go after this with everything they've got to, go after people and pursue the penalties to the furthest extent of the law possible. But what we're seeing so far, unfortunately, sadly, I guess, is that there is just random racism and individual acts of hatred, some of which rise to maybe the hate crime level or the violence or destruction of property level. Some of it is just really hateful language and really, intimidation and mistreatment. And it seems to be just random and popping up. I think the Howard County Police believes that the incidents there with vandalizing the businesses was, obviously, I believe that the businesses were targeted because they're Asian, but it doesn't appear to be some organized group at this point.
Gotcha. David, give me a sense of what you think about that same issue, and then any state legislative remedies that you guys are looking at.
Sure. And obviously, it's on one end of this, it's very difficult to legislate good taste, and being part of a culture that doesn't accept this kind of behavior. But nevertheless, we try to push it through legislation. And the vast complexity of issues we have here just lends itself to so many different conversations. And I'll just give you a few examples. Very directly on hate crimes, we're starting to try and put in options to give judges tools to mandate education programs that actually are proven to reduce recidivism for people who come through them. But part of the challenge there is it requires, as we're noting here, a culture of calling and reporting these crimes. And as we know, there's not just debate about, people are ready to suggest that you're not the victim of a hate crime, but we need to get over that and tell people to call, that this whole nonsense that we're listening to right now should not be a reason not to call and report these incidents. On the more complicated end of this, I'll just point to, I've been very intrigued and heartened reading commentary from one of the sons of one of the women that was killed in Georgia, and his very clear efforts to rehumanize and recapture the story from the sort of fetish frame, I think, that is sort of lurking as a cloud over this story in the media. And so in Maryland, I would say we've likewise been having that difficult conversation about both trafficking victims and sex workers, and where you draw the lines between a public health and services approach to criminal behavior. And so I think that's a very deep and real part of this story here. So I'll just leave it at that. But there's obviously many, many more conversations to have. And not all of them are legislative. Lily Chi, one of my colleagues, took to her pen and started discussing very real taunting that she's facing because of her background as a Chinese immigrant from colleagues in the legislature. So it's, you know, we all have a part now.
Well, thank you for telling me that. I wanted to just mention some of what's happening at the federal level. First of all, in terms of responding to hate crimes, the FBI says report it first to local police, but also send a message to fbi.gov/tips to give tips about hate crimes that are taking place. The Baltimore field office for the FBI, you should also call. That's 410-265-8080. That's 410-265-8080. There are good resources out there, including stopaapihate.org and standagainsthatred.org, where you can also go to report hate crimes and aggressive insults and all of the microaggressions that people are experiencing out there now. In Congress, I just wanted to update you on some of the stuff that we've been doing. The House Judiciary Committee held a hearing last week on anti-Asian discrimination and violence. I was delighted to participate in that hearing, and I benefited from a conversation with the Hogans about what they had experienced, and I was able to refute the idea that this is somehow partisan propaganda. We are looking at a couple of different pieces of legislation to further help law enforcement monitor and enforce in the hate crime field. And one is called the No Hate Act, and the other is the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act. So we're looking at both of those. I'm a proud co-sponsor of both of these bills, and we're working to try to improve the focus of the federal government on this. You know, I've got to say that last year, under the last administration, as the chair of the Oversight Subcommittee on Civil Rights and Civil Liberties, I tried to lead hearings on a number of matters related to hate violence, and we just got very little or no cooperation from the administration on it. And we know that the new administration really is committed to do something on it. But I'm very glad that all of you have been so lucid and outspoken and passionate about this. And I want to just give you all a chance to say some final words to the people of Maryland. And perhaps I could start with you, Governor Hogan.
Well, thank you very much, Congressman. I appreciate your focus on this issue, and thanks for having us both today. I think Delegate Moon touched on this. It's important to remember that beyond the policy changes that we can talk about, I just think that more leaders must speak out and must remind all Americans that, you know, what we have in common binds us together as one nation, and that hate of any kind, racism of any kind against anyone is un-American and unacceptable and wrong. And each of us, regardless of our race, ethnicity, or national origin, is either an immigrant ourselves or a descendant of those who came to America searching for a better life. I know my wife probably wants to weigh in on that.
I think we are, as David is, thank you, but your second generation, we have three daughters like that. I am your parents like first generation. This is, we are working so hard. We are our, fellow Asian Americans have built our lives, just like so many others. So no one should go back to somewhere. This is our home. We are all American, just like everyone else.
Well, it's my sincere hope that more leaders across the country will stand up and speak out about the need to confront and defeat the challenge of anti-Asian discrimination, hate, and violence. It's something that the nation must do. So thank you again, Congressman, for your leadership on this serious issue.
Oh, I so appreciate that. David, do you have any final thoughts?
Sure, thanks. I'll just go back to the incident from my childhood with the house, the Asian family's house being spray painted with slurs. And I think back to that and I'm like, well, I guess the good news is it was hopefully just kids that did that, but that's not actually good news at all. What it is, though, is it's a reminder to have these conversations early. That was going on, decades ago. The shooter in Georgia was very young, by my look. And so you have to wonder what sort of conversations, if any, were had. So Jamie, thank you again for pulling us together to have this conversation.
Thank you, David, for those excellent words. And maybe I'll close with a thought triggered by Mrs. Hogan. America is such a beautiful country because it has been like this magnet to the world. People come from all over the place, and except for the Native Americans, all of us are immigrants or the children of immigrants or the children of slaves who were brought here against their will. But still, with all of the flaws of the country, with all of the injustice that we've seen, the beautiful hope of America is that we can bring people together and we can live together peacefully, we can learn from each other, and we'll be something bigger because of having that magnificent diversity. And I think Maryland embodies so much that hope, that promise, and that reality. I mean, we're like the most educated state, and we are so successful and prosperous because it's a land of ambitious, restless people who want to make things happen and work with people across every kind of line and boundary. But if you can't handle that, if you can't handle the dream of America, at least handle this, right? We're not one race, we're not one ethnicity, we're not one national origin, we're not one political party or ideology, but we have one constitution and one rule of law that binds us. And so even if you can't learn to love people or be friends with people who don't look the same as you or think the same way you do, at least obey the rule of law. Don't beat people up and harass them just because they're not the mirror image of yourself. And thank you, Governor, for making law enforcement pay attention to this. Thank you to the First Lady for speaking out so forcefully. David Moon, thank you for your leadership on it. Let's move forward as one Maryland and show the country how to do this. Thanks so much, you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.